speech. First, how this norm, which is to say to putting identity on your work is good, it somehow increases toxic occupation. But secondly, I'll talk about how putting your identity on the work is somehow fragile and not appropriate to you have your identity on it. But before that, 3 points of clarifications. First, the paradigm that we need to defend from our side of the house is that the work should not be is a dominant norm that people subscribe to. On that particular situation, work is regarded as just a work, and that doesn't mean anything more than that. And it's valuable insofar as it provides some materialistic benefits to you, including payment, for example, or the welfare which company provides you to your employee, that sort of stuff. That's a word that we need to defend from my side of the house. The second clarification, the paradigm which opposition side of the house needs to defend is the mixture of norm, which means that some people opt into the option that the putting your identity on the work. And I guess I'm going to talk about why is that toxic in my constructive speech. But third of all, identity that the crucial feature that we need to recognize about identity is that the identity is trade-off. If you subscribe to if you regard your identity as somehow religious, for example, that means you can choose other option or that sort of stuff. That means that in the situation where the individual chooses to put your identity on the work, that's it. And that person cannot choose subscribe to any other value that exists in the society. So first of all, any clarification? Okay. So first of all, about how this norm on putting your identity on the work increases toxic occupation in a role. The ideal situation or the process in which people choose their occupation should be about consideration about money or working hour, for example, or what kind of like welfare that this company have. But in the status quo, there are so many people that choose their job based on the yarigai, for example, which means the motivation to work, for example, or any other like professionalism, for example. That sort of abstract value that doesn't exist at all to begin with. Two features that these jobs likely to have. First of all, people need to make some effort in that work, right? You need to make effort to improve your skills, to have betterment of your skills in that profession. But secondarily, for example, like drinking culture or that sort of stuff, some meaningless culture that exists within this industry. This is the likely scenario that we need to think about it. This is simple for the reason that to maintain and keep individual on that industry, this occupation tends to have this sort of meaningless culture, and that's somehow toxic in many ways. What would be likely to happen on the government side of the house is that people reform their working condition for the simple reason that work is just work, which means you don't need to have to do some meaningless activity in that occupation or meaningless like improvement of yourself in that industry. The second thing we need to recognize here is that there should be some collective action. There is some collective action problem that exists in the status quo. So many people in specific industry work hard under less payment, and that is a moment where people cannot opt out from that occupation. That is a toxic situation, but that would be solved on our side of the house. But thirdly, there is the human relationship in between with that industry is going to be more like business-like. Like, I don't have any personal feeling to you in that industry. That is better because we have more fair evaluation of the individual skills in that situation or individual, ability to perform in that industry. But both, I guess people are likely to choose option of changing your job or changing your workplace on our side of the house because we no longer have that sort of meaningless human connection within this industry. For this full structure reason, I guess a better working condition for each individual is going to happen on our side of the house, but not on their side of the house, simply because some people perceive that horrible working condition is their identity goal.
If work is not important for people, why do people invest that amount of resources for fundamentally reforming the industry, the ways in which people work in corporations and industry?
Simply, individual will not opt into that industry if the working condition is hard, and throughout the market mechanism that that market is going to be shrink, but we think that's totally fine. That's a stance from our side of the house. What is the impact of this reformation in this specific industry? Recognize the fact that there are so many people who is suffering right now under the harsh working condition, and it is very unlikely for reformation within this industry is going to be happen. For example, consultants, for example, or people who work in investment bank, for example, and that sort of working condition exploit this individual, but these people remain in that industry because these people identify themselves in the work. That's a sort of the worst form of identity that we can imagine around the world. Second thing I want to talk about is about how the work is fragile basement of the identity to begin with. I want to point out the risk of your identity is going to be crushed, or the identity crisis that would be likely to happen. For example, you might be fired from your corporation. For example, you might be no longer be able to work in specific working condition. There are three reasons for this. First, in terms of the fire, companies have incentive to fire you in order to reduce human human cost in specific scenario, and these companies have capacity to do so in economic recession, for example, or somehow performance of that company get worse. That is one moment you are no longer able to identify yourself within that specific job. The second reason, you might be having diseases, for example, like physically or psychologically. That is a moment where you can't work in that industry, but you identify yourself in that industry, right? That is a moment where identity crisis happen. But thirdly, like for example, taking care of your parents, for example, or you might have children in your family. That is a moment also your identity in the work has gone crushed. The comparative we need to defend from our side of the house is, for example, like placing your identity on family, for example, or friends, for example, or community, local community, or the hobby, or that sort of stuff. That is more tangible, and that is more stable form of identity, and that is a paradigm that we need to defend from our side of the house. Let's talk about the tie back of this motion, right? The paradigm that the opposition side of the house needs to defend from that side of the house is that this norm allows some exploitative industry to be sacrificing individual, and some people there are exploited and exploited in harsh condition. That is worse. What we propose from our side of the house is that people getting out of there and change their mindset and put their identity in more stable manner. Proud to propose for the very last time.
Is a self-entrepreneur and a Netflix anime producer, and we cannot be so much more proud of what he does. Two things I want to talk about before I give you the two arguments. I'd like to restart the speech because my mic wasn't on.
Change intro.
Mitsushi-san is a self-entrepreneur and a Netflix anime producer, and we cannot be so much more proud of him. Two things I'd like to talk about for the two arguments from side of opposition. First, what is our stance and what do we believe in? We believe in wider accessibility and inclusivity of identity being explored in comparison to things like ethnicity or gender or your family being your sole identity. But the second thing is that we think the second thing is a rebuttal against them about useless socialization in industry. Two things. A, that is how you make connections most of the time. So you better your situation in attending these social events. For example, if you're a doctor and you go to conferences, that is how you make connections, that is how you are able to better your situation in the industry. But B, if conditions are as bad as you say, and these socialization events are really as useless as you say, like just going to a drinking party, we think that is not a burden that we have to defend, right? Because I can be a doctor, but I don't have to be a heavy drinking doctor to be able to claim the title of your job entitlement. Two arguments then. First, you can customize your own identity. We think that by constructing the change and being able to have the freedom to opt out of your job anytime, this is better than the comparison the side proposition gives you. Three things. A, we think that job occupations give you a plethora of options. It is innate, right? For example, if you want to be an influencer, if you want to be a social media successor, that is a plethora of options that you can choose from. We think that you can choose a job that fits your personality, which is more accurate representation of who you are, right? But B, we think that quitting and switching job is more possible on our side when claiming job occupation to be your personal identity rather than something like families, right? Because when job is personal identity, you can always find something that matches you and your personality. So when you're younger, you're more active. You want to be someone who actively like socializes. You can choose a job that prompts you to have like that active socialization skill, right? But if you're older and you're more likely to want to contribute to the community around you, you can be something like an educator or a teacher or a professor. We think that those are things that you are able to choose when on our side, we're talking about job occupation. But C, for poor minorities, we think that occupation is still better on our side, right? Because when you have the incentive, we think that in the current world, those people who have the most high reputation and highly regarded job are not people with the most income or the people who are of wealth. We don't think that it is people who are able to obtain large amount of success through things like being an investor. We think that it is exactly those people who are able to be like educators, who are able to be professors or public attorneys that actually help contribute to the community around them, that are able to claim the ability to have high status and high prestige when it comes to their occupation. What this does is, when you are able to spread the narrative of job occupations being like that contributes to the community around you, being the most prestigious and being personal identities, we think that it offers and helps a wider range of individuals with this narrative. Because when you have more people taking on the job of being like public defense attorneys or being like educators, we think that ultimately it helps the people who are in minority communities and who need these kind of people to help them out. 3 questions I'd like to answer then. A, why is customization important? Because we think that there's a choice that you're able to make rather than other unchangeable consequences and outcomes. So you have less limitations, right? So you can't change things like your race or your race. But we think that this is and on their side, if you ultimately make your personal identity only about your family, the moment that your parent dies, you're fucked, right? But B, the second thing that I would like to answer is, why are jobs more accurate representation of you, right? Because job reflects the character. If I'm a philanthropist, that means I like to give back. If I'm a doctor, that also means I like to give back, right? And if I pick up trash, that means I like to help make the community cleaner. We think that those are accurate representation of personality and what I innately like and what I want to do with my life. But C, why are underprivileged individuals able to customize their job occupations? Because we think that on a comparison, it is ultimately more customization than things like ethnicity. But even if, we think that if you are from underprivileged communities, and have like a generally consented, low paying job, or low regarded job. If I'm like an Asian person who's like gomihiroi, but that means that by hard working, that is also something that I am able to customize, right? I can become like a full-time contracted worker rather than a part-time contracted worker. And I think that minor difference is very important because it also reflects on the kind of hard work that I put in when it comes to my personal identity and my job occupation. And we think that that is something that side proposition cannot claim. Second argument then, we think that you get lifelong commitment and satisfaction from your job on our side. 3 things. A, everyone has to engage with some work ultimately and at the end of the day. Vast majority of the people have to engage with work anyway in the society. So we think that it is much better in our outcome when you are able to claim that. But B, if that is the reality, right, satisfaction will dramatically increase in our situation when you're able to actually be proud and be able to say out loud what your personal identity is and what your job occupation is. But see, even if not, right, you find belongings that separates from other unchangeable factors, which we think is very important in the debate. The result is, if you do not base your core identity upon job occupation, we think that the harsh realities of escapism will be more prompted. This means that I will ridicule my work, I will undermine my motivation, and I don't want to work because I don't think that is like an accurate representation of who I am. So I disregard my job, even though I have to actively engage in it, and we think that that ultimately damages your own emotional and physical and economic status. 3 important then. First, you're able to get better skills on our side. We think that you're able to get like necessary license or qualification from your hard work if you're able to engage in your work more accurately. So for example, like you will be able to try to research more, or you will try to improve your records. We think that brings up like an economic benefit and emotional security. Why do you think that is important, right? If you have emotional and economic capitals, you can also explore alternative options such as like going from a doctor to like going into like a Red Cross doctor, going into like occupations that ultimately gives back to the community. But second, we think that it is also better for the surroundings in general. If you have more motivation, if you're able to engage into your work more accurately, that means we ultimately decreases the possibility of other people being harmed by like your ultimate like very bad work ethic. But lastly, we think that if people are more serious about their work, things like unionization happens, things like actual protesting happens, rather than on their side when people just think that it's work, nothing happens, and they likely give up on their personal status and like their hateful work, and rather than embody it and try to make it for the better, proud to oppose.
Very toxic. You should absolutely not rely on workplace as a form of identity. Responses. Firstly, they say social events are unnecessary, you don't have to go. They don't engage with our case because we say that people, even if you don't want to go, other people go, and you think that there's a competition resulting from that, the actions of others, which forces you to go as well, insofar as you go all in with your identity that is based on work. So they don't engage with our case. Secondly, their claim is that there are a variety of options in relation to occupations. So there's choice, and that's good. But the claim that they don't make is why are other forms of identity not giving you options? Because obviously our options are not limited to things like family. You have hobby groups such as debating. You have high school friends, for example. It's just a plethora of different options that is widely available on the other side of the house as well. They fail to characterize why that had to be dropped in the first instance. The third claim that they make is that philanthropy is good because you have more doctors, there are more people choosing work on the basis of their altruism. Firstly, that is only tied to certain occupations, so at best we would say that is a marginal impact, but in fact these people are often exploited in the status quo insofar as they are always told, you are not paid well, but you're given the identity, you're given your reward in the form of emotional fulfillment. All of that crap that we think should go away. That is why caretakers in Japan are always overworked and underpaid. That is the reality in this debate. But secondly, obviously under our world, no thank you, to the extent people do not regard work as, I forgot to turn on my timer by the way. So if any of you have it, please, thank you. Alright, so in a world where people don't rely on jobs as a form of identity, obviously they would seek other options for validation by other people. So for example, people that receive high amounts of salary, like Yoshiroda in 2 months' time, will kind of consider, maybe donating money to charity groups, because if that is the kind of acceptance that they want from other people around you in society. So we would say that there's an increase of push towards philanthropy on the our side of the house, but definitely Yoshiroda will not do that. Thirdly, I think their only engagement to our claim about workplace conditions and how that improves is firstly that you have connections. That's why is that you can change jobs anyways within the industry. But obviously our claim is that you have connections to people specifically in your company, and you cannot opt out from that because your identity is connected to those people. But secondly, their claim is that you can unionize. But obviously that unionization will not be effective insofar as unionization and the power of strikes is reliant on the ability of individuals to opt out, or the willingness of individuals to opt out of that industry in the first place, because it's the biggest bargaining chip that people have. You don't have that on their side of the house because obviously people regard their work as an important factor. That is why this is not a good engagement to our case. Firstly, I want to claim that trade-off is real and significant in this debate. What do I mean by that? Firstly, workplace and corporations have a significant impact in society, and it impacts the way in which people choose their identity. No, thank you. Obviously, corporations have a lot of money. They have wide social impact on a general level, but more specifically speaking, they have high levels of advertisement and brainwashing, in other words, targeted at students soon to be employed. For example, myself in 1 or 2 year time. For example, they do a lot of hyperbolic advertisement that you will be spending a lot of time of your life in this work, for example, that you will lose existing identities. That's why you should start relying on jobs. That is the advertisement mechanism that corporations create in our society, which kind of forces people, or at least makes them consider job as an important source of identity. That is why they take pride in this. They start prioritizing these things in the current society. Notice that there's competition and reconstruction of identity in this instance, because obviously to the extent you commit yourself to recruitment communities, you have far less time to spend on debating. That's why all debaters go away in their third year, whether in their third year or fourth year in Japan. This comes at the expense of all the other communities that you have built. Notice, when you go into your industry, when you start using your job, it is difficult to backtrack on the lost connections at that point in time, insofar as the bar to reconstruct community is significantly higher at that point in time, insofar as you're not remaining in contact with those people. The connections that you had, the ones in the past, might have been lost at that point in time. That is why you start relying far more on jobs as you lose connections to other forms of community and identity. That is why the trade-off was real. Before we move on to explaining why workplace and mental well-being in workplace is terrible,
Is your claim that if I was being abused by my parents, that the bar to opting out of that is low and the bar to recreating a new family is low?
I mean, you could obviously opt out of family in that instance, insofar as our claim is that you still have hobby groups, you still have, club activities like this room, basically. Alright, so impacts on well-being as a source of identity. So our claim is that obviously you'd be mentally terrible insofar as you rely on work. Why is that? Firstly, because workplace is exploitative. That means you're likely to be scolded by bosses when you don't do enough work, and that directly hurts your identity and mental well-being on your side of the house. On the other side of the house, obviously that is not going to have a deep impact on your identity, insofar as you think that's just a functionality of life, functionality necessary to earn a living, which is obviously not tied to your deepest level of identity. But secondly, workplace is competitive. This means you're likely to be compared with other people in order for corporations to motivate people to work more and more. And insofar as everyone loses the competition except the ones that are at the top, I think people feel terrible from being compared. But also, obviously, you cannot confide in other people the relations that you create within workplace, because you, for example, if we work in the same company, we are competitors. I cannot trust in you fully insofar as you might have the chance of stripping away my job. That is why you can never really feel safe in this particular community. Importantly, your private life also becomes your public life under their side of the house. There is absolutely no distinction between who you are as a person and who you are as a worker. That is important because obviously you have no escape route under their side of the house in any case. Notice that obviously on the other side of the house, the comparative of relying on families, friends, are better, firstly for the reason that they're constant as a source of support, or at least more constant than the comparative that they stand behind. But secondly, they're conveniently detached from your reality. For example, high school friends are connected because of past experience, and that past experience is not influenced by what goes on in workplace. That is why it's a far better instance in our side of the house. But even if you don't believe that this is a complete trade-off, obviously your experiences in workplace seeps into other forms of identity as well. For example, you cannot commit to your family anymore because you don't have enough time. That's a trouble that many families in Japan currently have. Also, if you're mentally unstable, obviously you cannot enjoy activities in other forms of identity, thereby losing commitment to those forms of identity as well, causing loss of identity in the long term. For those reasons, it is a terrible choice to rely on work.
The crucial flaw upon the proposition in this debate is that they fail to prove a comparative. It is unclear why putting the entirety of your identity upon something else, like religion, hobby, or family, is in any way better than putting it upon work. I'm going to be doing three things in my speech. Firstly, what is the best form of identity for yourself? Secondly, engaging to their argumentation on shitty conditions at work. And third and finally, running an extending argument. Firstly then, what is the best form of identity? The thrust that comes from proposition is very, very simple. We tell you that it is the best form of identity to base it off of work because it is inherently flexible, that it allows you to change it. For example, you can change your profession, unlike what is possible in opposition where you're constrained to the family that you're born in and when you cannot escape the shackles of the religion that you have opted into. Here's the simple comparative. We tell you that uniquely in our world then, when you can change what job you work in, or for example, what workplace you work in, when it is an actually fluid form of identity, that you can pursue other alternatives when something doesn't work out for you. The opposition argumentation here is that, well, inherently, identity is a very fragile, or the workplace is a very fragile matter, that you can get fired from your job, and therefore that you must not base it off of workplace. The very easy response against this entire argumentation is to say that there really is no uniqueness. Your religious leader could die. Your family could abandon you. There is no reason why. You could even get kicked out of the debate club, right? There is no reason why then that that workplaces are in any way unique, or you're anywhere more likely to become fired, or it's in any way more fragile than any other alternative. Second thing in my speech then. The shitty conditions at work argumentation that comes from opposition. I have 4 responses against this. Number 1, most importantly, on the flip, the only way we get actual practical change in workplace conditions is if people care about work. If nobody gives a shit about what work you do, if nobody cares the conditions that you work in, and if nobody cares about the work that they do, then there is no incentive to create actual practical change. The important note under this is that there is massive short-term trade-off when you have to advocate for change, because the ways in which you advocate for change is doing things like unpaid strikes, is doing things like paying lawyers to litigate for you. Those are the ways in which you get change practically in workplaces, and those are things that require massive short-term trade-offs. Importantly on our side then, when there is a massive barrier to entry for workplace change, uniquely when you care about your workplace, uniquely when you care about the work you do and the quality of the work you do, that is at the point in which you have the incentive to create actual practical change. Second response, that even if our flip does not stand, that their argumentation is categorically untrue. Because I don't see why I would stop giving a shit about work conditions. There is a lack of mechanization that comes from the proposition bench. We believe that fundamentally, you care about your livelihood, happiness, and compensation, that you are unlikely to trade that off. Thirdly, even if this doesn't stand, I think that it still remains symmetrically in both worlds. Exploitation still happens in any other alternative opposition we want to bring up. You can be used purely for your salary by your family. You can be abused by your family. You can get coerced by religions. You can even get coerced by shitty kohais in your club to do all of the club management for them. Those are still methods of exploitation that exist in any other alternative opposition may want to bring. What is the deadlock breaker in this symmetricization then? We tell you that opt out and the ability to make your identity fluid through the changing of your work is unique to our bench, which allows for the breaking of this deadlock. Note that Tota's response that you can easily opt out of your family or whatever doesn't really stand, right? Their entire claim is that the connection is big. Their entire claim is that the connections you harbor through your workplace is big. Why is that not true for your family? Again, no comparative. I'll take you in a second. The fourth and final thing is on the way. At the very worst case scenario for our world, we are willing to trade off exploitation insofar as the individual is willing to do so as well. For example, I am more willing to debate 20 hours a day because I love it. I'd rather do that than work 4 hours a day as an accountant. If I am happy to trade off exploitation for individual happiness that I derive from my work, as individuals in our world are willing to do, then I'm happy to take this. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
The mechanism of unionization that arises from people taking work seriously relies on the fact that identity is inherently tied to money. But why do corporations create the identity in such a way?
Sorry, I don't really understand the point of the response. I'm sure my whip understood it, so he'll do most of the engagement to that. But I think the general point here is, right, that inherently, I think that when you care about your work, and when your identity is tied to your work, it's not just about the money you get from the work, it is about the quality of work you do, the type of work you do, the products that you make as a process of that work, and therefore you're likely to care about the process more, not just the end result. Sorry if I misunderstood your POI. Last 2 minutes is going to be spent on extending then. The third argumentation that we're going to bring from opposition is that we decrease the societal narrative to discriminate based on job. The premise of this argumentation is that the reason why things like race and gender is deemed to be important and something that you ought not discriminate based on is because they are of massive importance to an individual. This is why things like discrimination based on political identity is also a perceived negative. What uniquely happens in our world then is when society perceives identity to be of utmost importance to an individual, and when society recognizes that jobs are crucial to an individual's identity creation, then discrimination based off of job also in tandem decreases. Why is discrimination bad? I'm sure they won't contest this, but very simply then. Discrimination fundamentally harms innocent stakeholders. Look at the cleaners of our world. Look at the porn actors in our world. Look at the prostitutes in our world. For many individuals, they choose these jobs not knowing of the massive stigma that this may occur. And even if they do realize it, even if this is consented, we don't think that this negates the practical harm it causes upon an individual's psyche that occurs on proposition. This is better than an identity. This is better than having an identity based off of a marginalized group. For that then, for three reasons. One, because it is the best form of identity that is uniquely fluid in comparison to other things. Second, because you actually can enjoy your job unlike the shitty work conditions that proposition has to stand for. And thirdly then, because for the most vulnerable actors who get discriminated based off of their job, we actually fundamentally protect them to societal narratives. Proud to stand on opposition for the last time. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Keio, for those final remarks. Now, as a final substantive for team proposition in this grand finals, let's invite Keio, please. Here.
As an identity is really a dangerous thing, even as an option existing under the opposition world, even not dominant. I'm going to compare likelihood and impact at the salvation happen on our side of the house from the toxic narrative on our side and the harm opposition side has provided. So firstly, I'm going to talk about customization of identity, then I'm going to talk about people's opportunity to find an identity other than job. So firstly, about customization of identity. Five things to say here. The firstly, about what fits or reflects your identity provided by the leader of the opposition. I think that may be the happiest case, but in the majority of the case, I think it's not be true for three reasons. Firstly, I think your skills may not just be fit into your ideal job in the first place. Even if you prefer certain types of job based on some how much that's appealing to you, sometimes your skill you have or your experience doesn't just match to your job or ideal job. But secondly, often company is the one also the recruiting the one and who has at the end the power to decide who is going to be recruited in the first place. So even if or how much you want to enter certain job or how much you want to have certain job, the company is the one who may just reject you at the end. But third, I think sometimes economic reason or economic payment or geographical limitation doesn't just allow you to have an ideal job for you. So which means I don't think under the opposition side they can claim that in every cases you can have a job which is actually reflects your identity or things like that. But secondly, about switching occupation. The first thing to say here is that on our world, the norm that excludes jobs from identity, which makes switching free even on our side of the house. So at best, even on the opposition side, you can freely switch the job. That's not different from our side at the end, so we couldn't get why that's beneficial in the first place. But second response to that switching occupation is that, but rather what we have explained on our side is that we can provide a better switchability or exchangeability of the job. The first reason here is because you fear to lose the identity even temporarily in the first place. Because once you put identity on job, you are likely to fear losing identity even if it's temporary and even if job is switchable in the first place. But secondly, I think you will also have fear whether you can construct your own identity on your job, right? Because necessarily your identity constructing on certain job have some specific ties to your job, or specific job in the first place. Which means it doesn't necessarily mean you will be able to create same identity or you can construct same identity you can satisfy with on new job in the first place. So even if we concede there is some switchability, I don't think they can get as much benefit as they claim. The third response here is that unchangeability or the choice thing they claim. Three responses here. The first thing I want to say here is that I think the comparative here is that you initially have a choice for what you want to construct identity on, which means I think even if you claim you can change a job or you can choose the job, I don't think that's the very big increase of the choice in the first place, because initially you have a bunch of the options to construct identity only in the first place. But secondly, we are not saying like every other identity is unchangeable in the first place. They say like family is unchangeable. Maybe that's the harder part of the changeable identity, but we say that's still changeable, but also a hobby or a community or what you are studying or things like that are still changeable even on our side, and many other options is still existing. But last of all, I think you, or even on your side of the house, in the worst case, you can be unemployed, so that's the same thing, right? You cannot choose the job. But fourth thing under this argument is you need to work somehow. Here is also two responses. The first thing, I think we have already explained how that idea rather forces individuals to join toxic atmosphere in the company or in the working place in the first place. So even if we consider people have to work somehow, that's the reason why you are more like coerced to join the competition, or that's the reason why you have to commit the worthless action on their side of the house in the first place. But second response here is that rather excluding job from identity is better for people's work for two reasons. Firstly, I think you can focus on reward more, right? As my Prime Minister presented, I think what people will focus on our side about job is more like material like return on our side, which means you can more likely to choose the job which is like commensurate to what you are expecting or what you are expecting for a job, rather than like invisible or like unquantifiable yarigai or motivation for a job in the first place later. But B, I think discrimination, they talk about the same, right? I think that often privileged job is also dominated by privileged people. And like, even if you want to say that job is like somehow like, job is very important for you, I think that will also cause other type of discrimination, which like privileged jobs are dominated by privileged people, and people have to like respect those people, and people who are unprivileged who have to choose like not respected job is likely to be discriminated on the same time. But fifth one under this argument is about poor people. I think that's the extreme cases. Like we are not saying that every people have, like we are not saying that every people should have to quit identity as job, but we are just supporting dominant dom. So in the extreme cases, we have to accept even on our side of the house, poor people should like or have to put the identity on it. So that's the extreme cases and doesn't change. So anyway, so moving on to second argument, but yes.
You just spent 2 12-hour stints here debating, but you took that trade-off because you love debating more than you care about exploitation. If an individual is willing to make the trade-off, why is it not okay?
We are saying that even if you want to make that like trade-off, the like initial like stage or the initial information or atmosphere provided or the decision, the basis for you to make a decision is already distorted by this narrative. So I think that's the exact reason why we are opposing this narrative. So moving on to the second point about how people were able to find other identity than job. There are three things to say here. Firstly, the reason why you think that job is the only identity is maybe just because you didn't think about other identity in the first place, right? Like because, for example, you haven't engaged in any community activity, or you haven't went out after your work in the first place. So maybe that's more, maybe in some cases that's just easy as like not like that's going to be very easy in the first place. But secondly, I think actually having another identity doesn't require a huge cost in the first place. For example, having a family or having a job or like having a hobby, like going to community activity doesn't require any cost or like much cost on even on our side of the house. So we think that's still a viable option for you to find another identity other than job in the first place. But lastly, what we have explained is that having an identity in job is very unstable and force you to commit or force you to opt into a very toxic working condition. And even that, more than that, I think what we can get on our side of the house is that people who will not rely on job and who are trying to find a better material return for job, and that's why we are extremely proud to propose.
Can you hear me? Yes. Right. I'm so happy to debate with and against many top-level debaters in this tournament. I have just come back to the debate community. I think I will continue debating. Thank you very much. I will address 3 issues in my speech. Firstly, how do we combat workplace exploitation, the main concern from the other side of the house? Secondly, about identity crisis. fairly diversity of customizable choices. On the first level, how do we combat workplace exploitation? That's the main concern that they have explained this way. Fighting against exploitation, reformation of the workplace is more likely to happen when people believe that work is the most important priority for their life. If people believe that work is the fundamental source of identity, they have all the more incentive to invest resources, time, energy for combating workplace exploitation. Practically speaking, you have to join labor unions, you have to hire lawyers to make a litigation who legally ask for compensation for sexual harassment or workplace exploitation. And you have to make so many things. Look, this trade-off is really huge, not just about money that pointed out by Tota. The trade-off and costs are very huge. For example, you damage your reputations and amicable relations with your colleagues in workplace, or your career stops at the time. So fundamentally, what the workplace reformation requires a huge level of commitment and profound level of commitment. When people think that Joe is my soul, my dignity, and my respect, I don't want to lose everything. This is the most important motivation for compassion for people to spare that level of resources to fight against exploitation of corporations. For example, in Hollywood, Harvey Weinstein sexually harassed a lot of actors and actresses, and huge Me Too movement happened. There was a huge trade-off in cost because those female actors disclosed their identity, name, when it happens, and what kind of sexual harassment happened. They sold all the dignity. However, because those actors in Hollywood think that occupation, being an actress, is the most important part of identity, they spend that amount of resources and energies to legally sue Harvey Weinstein and other Hollywood corporations. That level of huge reformation is more likely to occur when people think occupation is the most fundamental source and core part of your identity, unlike hobbies. By contrast, the characterization given by Tota is like, under their scenario, even though your boss gives candid feedback, you don't care because, you know what, other things are more important. For example, your colleagues are your enemy. They're trying to steal your occupation and your grades and evaluation. If that is the characterization, then this level of fundamental and profound unionization is structurally less likely to occur. Therefore, we can't expect much resources allocated for workplace exploitation. Therefore, we win on this base. No, thank you. I'll take it later. On the second level, identity crisis. 3 levels of rebuttals. First of all, when you get fired, your identity is crushed. That's the strongest rebuttal from the other side of the house. No, it's relatively easy to find similar kind of jobs in a similar kind of industry, and you can construct a new relationship with your new colleagues in the workplace. For example, investment banking divisions, maybe Mr. Ushiroda will be joining in some, like a few months later, or consulting firm or tech company. This is irregular stuff. Check your LinkedIn status. People enjoy shifting careers and construct new amicable relations with their colleagues in many different workplaces within the same industry. Second of all, even in a worst case scenario like unemployment, you can join NPO and NGO. That's this kind of like an altruistic occupation gets high degree of respect. That's what leader of opposition Ayaka explained in her speech. Number 3, this kind of identity crisis is worse on their side of the house. When you base your identity or based on ethnicity, religion, or conservative family member, I think the scenario will be worse. The same level of persecution, oppression, exploitation, coercion still happens within ethnic group, racial group, or conservative family. The thing is that you can't opt out. Once problem happens, it's very hard for those people to opt out of your circumstances. Unlike the occupation that you can customize and switch, that's what leader position Ayaka explained. Like Tota explained that time to spend with your family member is important. You can't lose that. If your families are exploitative and you have family members like tiger parent or trying to impose conservative value upon you, I don't think your identity will be anyway maximizing your happiness. I would like to take a point from you. If not, I will go. Finally, diversity of customizable choices. Our case is that there are plethora of occupational choices for a wide range of individuals. The response from the other side of the house is hobby groups in community center is wonderful alternatives. You can enjoy playing piano there. Well, 3 responses. First of all, intensity of commitment is really different. As they themselves have characterized, reality is that you have to spend 8 hours of your day at workplace and you have strong connection with your colleagues in the workplace. That level of commitment is intrinsic and unique in occupation, unlike playing piano in community center. On the second level, Tota explained that corporations have the ability to launch a lot of advertisement and messages in order to indoctrinate young people. Right, that is good. I don't think community center or hobby clubs have that level of capital to send the messages about the attractiveness of playing piano or reading haiku in community center, as opposed to that, the plethora of companies, hundreds, thousands of corporations in our society have the ability to deliver different world. For example, when you are young, you can open the door for totally different world through those job interviews, through those watching videos and advertisements of different occupations, just like I was before I became the anime producer on Netflix. Finally, about the poor people. There are some people who can't freely choose occupation. I understand that. That's the worst case scenario, the least well-off of society, right? Those people have no other option but to choose occupations that some other people don't want to. For example, being a brothel, for example, being a cleaner in our society, or engage in some dirty work. The problem is that currently there is a stigma and discrimination towards those occupations. However, on our side of the house, when people think that the occupation is as important as ethnicity, gender, and ethnicity and race and color of skin, people's awareness about the level of political correctness will dramatically increase. That's the kind of world that we are more able to pay some more degree of respect and dignity for the people who engage with those works. We're more than happy to oppose. Thank you.
Panel, in our absolute worst case scenario, everything still remains symmetric. Even assuming you don't take any of Ayaka's argumentation, I don't think that proposition has been successful in giving you a single argument that stands unique to their bench. For that, oppose. 4 things: poor, job, performance, identity. First, on the impoverished individuals, which we think is very, very important. Mitsushi's amazing rhetoric should be enough to prove that to you. The simple case we gave you from Deputy Leader of Opposition is that the societal narrative that jobs are integral to an individual's cultivation of their identity leads to decreased discrimination based on the simple fact that they are not in a societally acceptable job. That the fact that an individual has to resort to prostitution is not a result of their own doing, but rather a result of alternate factors that they have no control over, and that it is wrong to discriminate to these individuals based off of such factors. We think that this is an unengaged argument that comes from Deputy Leader of Opposition. 7-minute speech from Government Whip is incredibly good, but still fails to engage to that argumentation. I think that this is a debate-winning argument alone. Secondly then, on the jobs. The simple thrust from proposition is that, well, you're likely to face exploitation. Mitsushi's most important response that also comes from my speech is very, very simple. It also comes in a POI much previously. That the best case on proposition is that these individuals are just angry at the corporation's shitty work conditions. In our world, even conceding the incentive that they claim exists in their world, we are the only world that proves the capacity of individuals to make a fundamental trade-off of time, relationships, money that exists when you want to make mass-scale change in working place conditions. That even assuming that the incentive exists on proposition, at best, they can make no change, and at worst, they can make no change, and at best for us, we are the only side that creates practical change in workplace exploitation. Even assuming none of this stands, we told you that we were willing to trade this off. My POI and my argumentation should prove this to you, that if an individual is willing to trade off being exploited for the benefit of, for example, enjoying their fucking job, that we're willing to let these people do so, that there is no explicit harm if an individual wants to do so. I think that this is also a thing that goes unengaged. Third clash, on the performance and enjoyment of your job. Our argumentation, this was the second argument from Ayaka's speech, was very, very simple. That everybody has to work, and therefore the incentive to disregard your job decreases in our world. That means that you uniquely care about your job. You're more likely to enjoy it. Ayaka then tells you that even if this is not true, that you at the very least find a sense of belonging that is unique to your job. I don't think that proposition successfully engages to this. Finally then, my last minute is going to be spent on the identity. Whether cultivating identity around work is better than cultivating an identity around the mirage of alternatives brought by proposition. Let's look at the proposition main argumentation here. Firstly, they tell you you're likely to get fired, that you can get fired from your job, that therefore you should not base your identity off of such fragile things. Two things. Number one, we tell you that this is a symmetric problem that exists in the majority of proposition alternatives, that I can get taken out from my position as Bucho of MAD, or that I can get kicked out of my school club, or that I can get literally abused by my family, or that I can get entrapped by my religious organization, that this remains a symmetric problem that exists for the majority of proposition alternative, therefore very not unique. But also secondly, that you can actually have the capacity to change what uniquely exists in our world, that occupations are societally made to be interchangeable, that uniquely occupations are the one thing which society deems acceptable for you to change. You can't change your family in the vast majority of scenarios. You can change your occupation, as Mitsushi said, look at your LinkedIn profiles. Finally, we tell you that this is the best form of identity inherently because it is fluid, that there's a lot of choice, that career shift is easy, that there's flexibility which uniquely leads to satisfaction in life and in your job. And for that, practice stand on opposition. Thank you very much for a wonderful 2 days.
Yes.
The first question in this debate is whether or not this was a reliable form of identity. I want to start with accepted premises of this debate. Firstly, that there's a significant trade-off due to the artificially created advertisement campaigns launched by corporations and the consequent loss of other communities. There was no engagement to this. In fact, Opp conceded to this. Secondly, that jobs are immensely time-consuming and therefore it is difficult to maintain other forms of community. This is unchallenged as well. Therefore, I want to clarify the comparative in this debate, because the opposition strategy is picking and choosing often extreme examples, or at least convenient examples as a point of comparison, and choosing to criticize our case. The comparative is our world, where there are few communities on which you rely, for example, families, for example, individually chosen hobby groups, which by the way includes and incorporates choice argument from the opposition world. Their world is a world individuals predominantly rely on jobs as a form of identity, as a base of your identity. There are a couple of things you must consider in this debate. Firstly, their claim was that jobs are fluid. Firstly, that was not an exclusive argument as for our characterization regarding groups and the choice you have in regards to choosing your group you want to belong to. But secondly, obviously this was a false comparative because it was a false comparative to claim that you have to defend ethnicity, for example, things that are not fluid, insofar as obviously the choice to opt out of ethnicity does not exist under their side of the house as well, insofar as that is a constant feature of who you are. That was why this is not a winning argument for them. Second, our claim was that firstly, this is a fragile form of identity. Secondly, that there's an element of competition, and thirdly, there's an element of exploitation, and therefore you must not rely on this as a form of identity. Obviously, the response from their side of the house was to say, other identities have the same problem. For example, family members can die, religions can kick you out. But this is an extreme example because in the majority of instances, this is not true. In fact, you must compare with our structural reasons as to why corporations structurally have an incentive to be exploitative, an incentive to be competitive, which increases dynamically the likelihood of these types of problems happening under their side of the house. Lastly, they say you can escape, but firstly, you cannot, is our claim, because of sunk cost and also created connection that is unique to your occupation in your specific workplace. People think the risks of opting out of your particular corporation is too huge in this instance. Obviously, their claim is that you can choose in the first instance, but our claim is that it becomes toxic over time, and therefore you must not rely on these jobs for your next 30, 40 years of your life. That is why in terms of identity, we're clearly ahead. Secondly, in terms of which side reduces exploitation. This debate is about the dominance of the narrative that this should not be the identity. And our claim was that this has direct influence on individuals and the choices that they make. Firstly, you choose jobs better. You only go if they offer you good conditions, and if not, you change jobs. Secondly, that there's an internal change insofar as there's no pressure or subconscious pressure of collective action, because people will not do things like active overworking, that sort of crap.
Third of all, we claim that this increases activism. The opposition's only mechanism as to why they reduce exploitation is because when people take jobs seriously, they commit more seriously to reforms. Firstly, this does not engage with our other mechanisms like choice of jobs, the market mechanism argument that we made from first speaker. Obviously, unionization is the least effective form of reform insofar as you need to actively change. But market mechanisms exist irrespective of that, and I think that's a far more realistic way to achieve change. Secondly, their mechanism is fundamentally unclear. Firstly, it comes in tension with corporate environment which we characterize. If you cannot lose the job, then obviously you don't have leverage in that instance. Secondly, we gave you structural reasons for why corporations are likely to connect identity to fulfillment in an emotional way or pride in the job itself in the long term. Therefore, people don't think of money as an important part of identity, therefore do not direct their efforts to reforms in the first instance. But also recognize the comparative. When people consider jobs as only important because of money under our side of house, people are far more inclined to be involved in these situations as opposed to their side of house where people care about the job in and of itself, which has nothing to do with reform. For all of those reasons, we think we win.